Officer Marcus Thompson had been patrolling the streets of Montgomery County for 8 years, and in that time he'd built quite a reputation. Not the kind you'd want though. Behind his badge and uniform lurked a man consumed by prejudice and drunk on power. His fellow officers whispered about his methods, but somehow he always managed to slide by without serious consequences. Thompson had a particular way of operating. He'd target black drivers for the most minor infractions, a taillight that flickered for just a second, going 2 miles over the speed limit, or his personal favorite, suspicious behavior that somehow only applied to people who didn't look like him. His arrest record was impressive on paper, but anyone paying attention could see the disturbing pattern. The complaints piled up on his supervisor's desk like autumn leaves. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation, you name it, Marcus Thompson had been accused of it. But every time he'd flash that cocky smile and somehow wiggle out of trouble. He had connections he'd remind people. His family had deep roots in law enforcement. Nobody could touch him. On a rainy Tuesday evening in October, David Washington was driving home from his job at the community college where he taught African American studies. He was tired, looking forward to spending time with his 2 young daughters and helping them with homework. David had always been careful around police. Growing up black in America had taught him that lesson early, but he never expected what was about to happen. If you like the story, comment, share, and kindly subscribe to this channel. Officer Thompson's patrol car had been trailing David for 3 blocks, looking for any excuse to make a stop. When David's tire briefly touched the white line while navigating around a pothole, Thompson's eyes lit up. Finally, his excuse. The traffic stop started routinely enough, but Thompson quickly escalated the situation. He claimed to smell marijuana, though David had never touched drugs in his life. He ordered David out of the car, then proceeded to tear apart the vehicle's interior, throwing David's teaching materials and personal belongings across the wet pavement. "What do we have here?" Thompson sneered, pulling out David's briefcase filled with lesson plans about civil rights leaders. "Teaching kids to hate cops, huh? Figures." His tone dripped with contempt as he flipped through papers about Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks. What happened next would change everything. Thompson claimed he found a small bag of what he said was cocaine tucked inside one of David's textbooks. David's protests of innocence fell on deaf ears as Thompson cuffed him, shoving him roughly into the back of the patrol car. "Another thug off the streets," Thompson radioed to dispatch, his voice filled with satisfaction. "These people never learn." What Thompson didn't know was that David's car had a dashcam, a small, inconspicuous device he'd installed after hearing too many stories like the one he was now living. The camera captured everything: Thompson's illegal search, his planting of evidence, and most damning of all, his racist commentary throughout the encounter. The bag Thompson found had his fingerprints all over it, and none of David's. Later investigation would reveal that Thompson had been carrying planted evidence for months, using it to frame innocent people when he couldn't find legitimate reasons for arrest. This was his standard operating procedure, his insurance policy for making sure his stops resulted in arrests that would look good on his record. David spent 3 days in jail before his lawyer could arrange bail. 3 days away from his daughters, 3 days of his reputation being destroyed in the local news, 3 days of wondering if his life as he knew it was over. The local newspaper ran the story with Thompson's version of events, painting David as just another drug dealer caught in the act. 6 months later, the case finally went to trial. Officer Thompson strutted into the Montgomery County courthouse like he owned the place, his chest puffed out with confidence. He'd testified in dozens of cases over the years, and his word as a police officer typically carried enormous weight with juries. David sat at the defendant's table with his court-appointed attorney, a young public defender named Sarah Martinez who believed in her client's innocence but knew the uphill battle they faced. Going up against a police officer's testimony was never easy, especially in a county where law enforcement was highly respected. As potential jurors were questioned, Thompson made no effort to hide his contempt for the proceedings. He rolled his eyes when David's character witnesses testified, snickered when David's daughters tearfully spoke about their father's integrity, and whispered mocking comments to the prosecutor loud enough for the defense table to hear. "This is just another waste of taxpayer money," Thompson muttered during a recess, loud enough for several people to hear. "We all know how this is going to end." When it was time for Thompson to testify, he took the stand with supreme confidence. His story was well rehearsed: a routine traffic stop, suspicious behavior from the defendant, and the discovery of illegal narcotics hidden in the vehicle. He painted himself as a dedicated officer just doing his job to keep drugs off the streets. But Thompson's arrogance was about to cost him everything. Public defender Sarah Martinez had done her homework. She'd spent weeks investigating Thompson's arrest record, interviewing his alleged victims, and building a pattern of misconduct. When she stood up to cross-examine the officer, Thompson actually laughed. "Good luck with that, sweetheart," he muttered under his breath, earning a sharp look from someone in the gallery. Martinez started slowly, asking routine questions about police procedure and the night of David's arrest. Thompson answered with cocky confidence, occasionally throwing in condescending remarks about proper police work and the dangers officers face on the streets. Then Martinez pulled out her ace, David's dashcam footage. The courtroom fell silent as the video played on the large screen. Every detail was crystal clear: Thompson's illegal search, his planting of evidence, and most damaging of all, his racist commentary. The jury watched in stunned silence as the officer they just heard testify under oath was exposed as a liar and a criminal. Thompson's face went white, then red, then white again. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as he watched his career and freedom evaporate in real time. But the real shock was yet to come. As the video ended and the courtroom erupted in whispers, a voice from the bench cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. "Officer Thompson," the judge said, his voice heavy with disappointment and barely controlled rage. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Thompson turned toward the bench, and that's when he saw him. Really saw him for the first time since entering the courtroom. The judge presiding over this case, the man who would determine his fate, was someone he knew better than anyone else in the world. Judge William Thompson. His father. The blood drained from Marcus Thompson's face as the full weight of the situation hit him. His father, the man who had raised him, who had taught him right from wrong, who had spent 30 years building a reputation as one of the fairest and respected judges in the state, was staring down at him with a mixture of heartbreak and fury. "Dad," Marcus whispered, the word barely audible in the deadly quiet courtroom. But that single word, caught by the court reporter and heard by everyone present, would change everything. The racist cop who thought he was untouchable had just called the presiding judge Dad, and the judge's expression made it clear that this was the worst possible scenario for everyone involved. The implications were staggering. How long had this been going on? How many cases had Judge Thompson presided over involving his son's arrests? How many innocent people had been railroaded by this father-son corruption network? As the realization spread through the courtroom like wildfire, Marcus Thompson finally understood that his arrogance hadn't just destroyed his career. It had potentially destroyed his father's legacy and exposed a scandal that would rock the entire justice system. But this was just the beginning. That moment when Officer Marcus Thompson called Judge William Thompson Dad was just the tip of the iceberg. What happened next exposed a web of corruption so deep and so systematic that it would bring down an entire judicial district and send shockwaves across the nation. The silence that followed Marcus's whispered, "Dad?" lasted only seconds before absolute pandemonium erupted. Court reporters frantically scribbled notes, spectators gasped and whispered, and attorneys on both sides sat in stunned disbelief. This wasn't just a conflict of interest, this was potentially decades of corrupted justice. Judge William Thompson's face had turned ashen. The man who had built his entire career on the principles of fairness and impartiality was watching it crumble in real time. His son, the child he'd raised to respect the law, had just exposed himself as everything William had spent his life fighting against. "This court is in recess," Judge Thompson announced, his voice barely steady. "All parties will remain available for further proceedings." As the courtroom emptied, David Washington sat in stunned silence. His attorney, Sarah Martinez, was already on her phone, likely calling every news outlet she could think of. This case had just become the biggest story in the state's legal history. Within hours, the FBI had launched a full investigation into the Thompson family's judicial empire. What they discovered over the following weeks would make national headlines and fundamentally change how the justice system operates in Montgomery County. The corruption wasn't new, it had been going on for over 15 years. Judge William Thompson had been systematically assigned to cases involving his son's arrests, ensuring that Marcus could operate with complete impunity. But it went deeper than just father protecting son. Financial records revealed that the Thompsons had been receiving payments from a network of corrupt attorneys, bail bondsmen, and even drug dealers. Marcus would make arrests, often of innocent people, and William would ensure harsh sentences that fed money into their criminal network. It was a father-son crime syndicate operating under the cover of justice. The dashcam footage from David's arrest wasn't just evidence of one planted drug case. Forensic analysis revealed that Marcus had been carrying the same bag of cocaine for months, using it to frame dozens of innocent people. Each arrest fed into his father's courtroom, where predetermined guilty verdicts ensured the money kept flowing. As news of the corruption broke, victims began coming forward by the dozens. James Mitchell, a mechanic who spent 2 years in prison for a drug possession charge that was completely fabricated. Angela Rodriguez, a single mother who lost custody of her children after Marcus planted evidence in her car. Robert Chin, a college student, had his scholarship revoked after a bogus arrest destroyed his reputation. Each story followed the same pattern. Marcus Thompson would target innocent people, plant evidence, make arrests, and then his father would ensure convictions. The victims were disproportionately Black and Hispanic, revealing the racist motivation behind their systematic persecution. But the most heartbreaking testimony came from Marcus's own former partner, Officer Jennifer Walsh. She tried to report Marcus's behavior years earlier, only to find her complaints buried and her career threatened. She'd been forced to watch in silence as innocent people were destroyed by the Thompson corruption machine. "I became a cop to protect people," Walsh testified before the FBI investigators, tears streaming down her face. "Instead, I was forced to watch as Marcus and his father destroyed lives for profit. I'll never forgive myself for not speaking up sooner." The FBI's financial investigation revealed the staggering scope of the Thompsons' criminal enterprise. Over 15 years, they had stolen over $3.2 million through their corruption network. Money came from multiple sources: bribes from attorneys who wanted favorable rulings, kickbacks from bail bondsmen who benefited from high bonds, and even payments from drug dealers who wanted their competition eliminated through false arrests. Judge William Thompson had used his position to manipulate court schedules, evidence handling, and jury selection. He dismissed cases against real criminals who paid him while railroading innocent people his son had framed. The corruption was so systematic that they developed coded language and sophisticated money laundering operations to hide their crimes. But here's the most shocking part: they weren't working alone. As the investigation expanded, it became clear that the Thompsons were part of a much larger network of corruption that extended throughout the state's judicial system. 3 other judges, 7 prosecutors, 12 defense attorneys, and over 20 police officers were implicated in the scandal. The network operated like a criminal organization, with Judge William Thompson as one of the key leaders. They would coordinate which cases went to which judges, ensure that corrupt attorneys were assigned to represent innocent defendants, and manipulate evidence to guarantee predetermined outcomes. The corruption had become so normalized that participants were communicating about it openly in emails and text messages. One prosecutor wrote to Judge Thompson, "Make sure Marcus brings us some good arrests this month. I need the money for my daughter's wedding." As the investigation unfolded, David Washington became a hero to his community. The college professor who had been painted as a drug dealer was revealed to be the victim of a massive conspiracy. His dashcam footage had single-handedly brought down one of the largest corruption networks in the state's history. The charges against David were not only dropped but completely expunged from his record. The state offered him a financial settlement that would ensure his daughter's college educations and compensate him for the trauma he'd endured. But David wanted more than money. He wanted systemic change. "This isn't just about me," David told reporters outside the courthouse. "This is about every person whose life was destroyed by this corrupt system. We need to make sure this never happens again." David used his settlement money to establish a legal defense fund for other victims of police corruption. He also became a leading advocate for police reform, using his story to push for mandatory body cameras, independent oversight, and stronger penalties for officers who plant evidence. The trials of the Thompson corruption network became the most watched legal proceedings in the state's history. Marcus Thompson, faced with overwhelming evidence, eventually pleaded guilty to over 40 felony charges, including evidence tampering, perjury, civil rights violations, and racketeering. Judge William Thompson's fall was even more dramatic. The man who had spent decades sentencing criminals was now facing decades in prison himself. His trial revealed the full scope of his betrayal of the public trust, and his own racist motivations became clear through recorded conversations where he used racial slurs and expressed satisfaction at putting those people in their place. The sentences were severe. Marcus Thompson received 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Judge William Thompson got 30 years, ensuring he would likely die behind bars. The message was clear: corruption at this level would not be tolerated. The Thompson scandal didn't just result in individual prosecutions. It sparked comprehensive reform of the entire judicial system. New laws were passed requiring mandatory body cameras for all police officers, independent review boards for judicial assignments, automatic recusal when judges have family members in law enforcement, stronger whistleblower protections for officers reporting corruption, regular audits of arrest patterns and conviction rates. But perhaps most importantly, David Washington's story became a catalyst for broader conversations about racial justice and police accountability. His courage in fighting the system, combined with his foresight in installing the dashcam, had exposed corruption that might have continued for decades. Today, David Washington continues teaching at the community college, but his story has taken on a life of its own. He speaks at police academies about the importance of integrity, testifies before legislative committees about judicial reform, and mentors young activists fighting for justice. The dashcam footage from that rainy October night is now used in law schools across the country as an example of how technology can expose corruption and protect the innocent. David's decision to install that camera, a small act of self-protection, ended up protecting countless future victims. Marcus Thompson sits in federal prison, a fallen officer whose arrogance and racism ultimately destroyed not just his own life, but his father's legacy and an entire corrupt network. His story serves as a warning to other officers who think they're above the law. Judge William Thompson died in prison 3 years after his conviction, a broken man whose betrayal of justice became a cautionary tale taught in every law school in America. This incredible story proves that justice, though sometimes delayed, will eventually find its way to the light. David Washington's nightmare became the key that unlocked decades of corruption and freed countless innocent people from a system designed to destroy them. The racist cop who laughed at a black man in court, thinking he was untouchable, discovered that even the most corrupt networks eventually crumble when confronted with truth and courage. And sometimes, justice comes in the most unexpected ways, through a single word whispered in a moment of panic that exposes an empire of corruption. The next time you see injustice, remember David Washington's story. One person with courage, one small camera, and one moment of truth can change everything. What would you do if you were in David's position? Would you have the courage to fight back against a system designed to destroy you? Kindly comment where you're watching from, like, share this video and subscribe to my channel.